Jag heter Johannes Westergården och jag arbetar på Adedo. Jag vet inte om alla känner till Adedo, men vi är ju ett företag som fokuserar på, det vill säga Group Office of Finance, där vi hjälper till med system för koncernredovisning, planering och analys. Vi samarbetar då med Adaptive Insight, som är en amerikansk företag som levererar molntjänster just på planering och analys. Jättekul att Rob Douglas, som är Vice President för UK and Nordic på Adaptive Insight, har då möjlighet idag att berätta om de erfarenheter som de har sett med att introducera rullande prognoser och vilka fördelar man får, men också vad man bör tänka på när man ska introducera rullande prognoser i sin organisation. Jag har även Ron Owen som jobbar som pre-sales på Adaptive Insight, som ska visa då hur Adaptive Insights planeringsverktyg, hur det stödjer hanteringen av rullande prognoser. Som sagt då, välkomna till det här webbinariet. Vi försöker göra detta på ungefär 50 minuter. Rob, it's over to you and welcome.
Okay. First off, I want to say thank you very much. First, number one, for giving up your time. Thank you for taking time over lunch to join us to talk about rolling forecasts. But also, secondly, thank you very much for letting me do this in English. My Swedish isn't up to doing this all in your local language, so I really appreciate you listening in English. As we go through this, what we're going to do today is talk about why rolling forecasts are important. We're going to quickly cover some 5 key steps to doing rolling forecasts, some ideas why you might want to do rolling forecasts, how you can achieve that. We then have a customer case study that I'm going to walk you through, so the value of doing rolling forecasts. So it might be a nice idea, but let's look at the value, what it actually delivers for a customer. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Adaptive Insight. So I'll tell you, we'll save that towards the end, and then we'll skip into a technology demo, and Ron will try and show you some of these key points in action. Just to start off with, both myself and Ron, and of course our colleagues from Adedo, have an enormous amount of experience in this marketplace. I've been at the budgeting and forecasting marketplace since about 92. Ron is just about as long as me, if not longer. So we've got a lot of experience here to share. But also Adaptive Insights has been in this marketplace for around about 15 years. We've now got about 4,000 customers worldwide, and we're helping them to do all sorts of financial planning and analytics, specifically a lot of customers wanting to do rolling forecasts. So what you're hearing here is really a distillation of all that experience from both myself and Ron, also Adedo, but also our customers. So let's get on with that. I forgot to say, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, or we will best be doing a Q&A session at the end. So feel free to put them in as we're going along, and we'll pick them up at the end, or just ask them when we get to that point at the end. Okay, so let's start off with just looking at the reasons why you might want to do rolling forecasts. And number one is that the first thing we really know about any budget or forecast is that it's wrong. That's the first thing you can say about any budget. Yeah, it's just not going to match the actuals. And we also know they're inaccurate. And really one of the major drivers of that inaccuracy, I know that's a bit of a flippant comment or a joke comment about it being wrong, but one of the things which really drives the fact that your budget or forecast is wrong is really that there is time. And the fact that time is really one of the biggest factors on your budget. And the fact that most annual budgeting processes take 4 to 6 months to generate, that it really tells you that if you're taking 4 months to come up with an annual budget, then that target is going to be, or a lot of that data in that budget is going to be really out of date quite quickly. And so a lot of companies are just trying to grasp this nettle and go beyond that sort of annual budgeting cycle and really grasp that that issue around time value of data and do it faster, do it quicker. Moving to a rolling forecast is one of the key things people want to do to tackle the data error as such, get data more up to date. So a lot of top performing companies are tackling this with rolling forecasts, going out in a more faster manner, collecting data on a more regular basis, keeping that time horizon going rather than just forecasting to the end of the year, keeping a rolling time horizon. There was this study done by the Aberdeen Group, which are a market analyst research firm. They looked at a whole series of different companies and then they separated out the top performing companies, companies who are doing very well, both by revenue growth and stock market performance. And then they looked at those top performing companies and said, well, what do you do around financial planning and analytics? It's quite a wide-ranging study. And here you can see on the left-hand side, the stat that 71% of those top performing companies were mitigating this risk of forecasting accuracy by continuously updating the forecasts. Companies who continually update the forecast are more likely to be high-performing companies. And that cadence drives a lot of things. So it's not like you regularly have to capture lots of items. It's about getting the key numbers, understanding the key numbers, collecting those on a regular basis, very fast, and keeping that rolling time horizon going as well. So companies are looking to tackle that key issue around forecast accuracy, the time value of information in one sense, but there's lots of other reasons why you might want to try rolling forecasts as well. You're looking for agile responses to changing market conditions, so being able to do what ifs. You're looking to do better decision making for your planning cycle, so being able to get that information, perhaps do what ifs and scenario planning as well, looking at the performance gaps, let senior executives handle performance expectations, so you know when a shock is coming and you can share that early on rather than getting surprised by it. And really, one of the reasons for doing rolling forecasts is to shorten those long planning cycles, which we often see on the annual budget. The annual budget process, on average, we see takes 4 to 6 months, and that's way too long. A lot of companies now are moving away from an annual budgeting process and moving more to a rolling forecast, around key drivers, and then they're dropping the whole annual budget process altogether and managing people to a set of metrics, collecting a fast cadence of data, and they find that a lot more value in terms of providing accurate data, but also engaging the business and dealing with all these issues which I've just highlighted here. And it's not just process improvements that rolling forecasts help you with and getting more accurate data. This really does impact your bottom line. And we've got a case study which we're going to talk about in a bit. It was it's from ZAG Industries. They do mobile phone accessories. And you can see with their particular business, you'll see a huge impact to their bottom line. And we'll talk through that. But here, again, from that Aberdeen Group study, they're saying that organisations that performed rolling forecasts saw 10% revenue growth over the past 24 months compared to a 7% growth for organisations which did not. So that's a 3% difference, and that's significant for organisations on their revenue line. The fact that you can grasp the issues, look at the data in a more regular fashion, in a more on-time fashion, in a more online fashion, just allows that improved decision-making around the organisation and just will drive, in this particular case from the Aberdeen Group study, a 3% boost on the P&L. So that's the overview of really why organisations are looking at rolling forecasts or some of the reasons why people are looking at doing rolling forecasts. So let's just look at 5 steps really of reasons or ways to implement rolling forecasts, or things which you can do to help put these into your business. And step 1 really is really tackling the issue of spreadsheets. It's very difficult to do this rolling forecast process with spreadsheets. Spreadsheets themselves are very error prone. I mean, you're putting lots of formulas in, you're putting them in the different cells. But the key thing about spreadsheets when you come into a rolling forecast, because you can make them do very complex models and you can double check all the millions of calculations that you're putting into spreadsheets. But one of the key problems you'll hit with spreadsheets is that they're very column focused. They don't have a proper timeline in the system, which means that when you come to roll on that window of opportunity or the window you're forecasting, whether it be a 12-month window, a 3-year window, or just a 3-month window, rolling forecast, whatever's sensible for your business, that's difficult to do in a spreadsheet because you're always having to copy extra columns and move things along. It's not a proper database with a proper time dimension. And this will lead to errors. Here's some very, very scary stats, which you see from some professional bodies about, 80% of organizations using spreadsheets, will have errors in it. 90% of spreadsheets have errors in it. We've seen these stats come in various formats. Some of them are pretty basic, like just formatting. Some can be very serious, as in, rounding errors which come up and just get cascaded through the business. And we've seen some organisations make multi-million pound mistakes just because they're buying the wrong thing or basing the decisions based on the wrong information. Yeah. So these spreadsheets are, in the first place, when Adaptive Insights is working with organisations, that's what we're replacing the majority of the time. But spreadsheets really aren't a good job for coordinating a bunch of people around a forecast, collecting data, moving that time window of data and doing that in a fast manner. Really, they're great personal productivity tools, good for doing some complex calculations. Really, when you start to expand it around the business and try and process information in a fast manner, in a consistent manner, you will struggle to do that sensibly. So spreadsheets really are the first issue you need to tackle if you're going to think about implementing rolling forecasts in your business. Yeah. Here we're highlighting another issue of spreadsheets, just the proliferation of data. I mean, as you copy every spreadsheet and send it round, you send it to 50 people in your organisation, you've got 50 copies of that data around the business. You want to do a best case and worst case, all of a sudden you've got 150 copies of that data around the business as you send it around to people. It becomes difficult to track as you start to build this up in your business. So to steer clear of these problems, we do recommend you go into a dedicated solution to do this, a proper database solution to do this. I know this can come across as a bit of a hard sell for Adaptive Insights, and we'd love you to pick Adaptive Insights to this, but really it's more us really highlighting the issue of spreadsheets to do this is a difficult one. So that's step one, or the first thing to think about as you look to tackle rolling forecasts. The second thing is to really think about what data you collect and really think about the key drivers in your business. And that's what we call driver-based forecasting. And what we see from a lot of organizations when we first look at that annual budgeting forecasting process, they really are collecting thousands of lines of information. A typical P&L balance sheet and cash flow forecast is about 1,500 lines of information. But people go beyond that, of course. They go into a deep customer analysis or product line analysis, gross margin modeling. They might go through headcount or project-based accounting. And this can really expand out the thousands of lines of information you're looking for. You multiply that by the 12 periods, and all of a sudden you're asking for quite tens of thousands of data points from each person. And that can be difficult to do, and that's one of the reasons why an annual budget can take 4 to 6 months to do. You're getting bogged down in the minutiae. And what we're suggesting here is really that companies move to a driver-based forecast. Here on the left, again from that Aberdeen study, the best-in-class companies are using driver-based data to get to that. And you do need to think about focusing on the key drivers. So one of the key examples I use is, look at your biggest, most variable costs. Those are the ones you want to model and collect data on. Perhaps it's people costs. So you go into depth on people and you collect the number of FTEs, the number of headcounts in your organization or in each department, but then you drive all the other costs from it. For example, whether that be your payroll and pension costs and all the other bits. But you just collect the FTEs. Now that's quite an easy number to collect from people. When somebody starts, when somebody finishes, you're just collecting 2 data points, not all the other hundreds of data points which are associated from that, because you're calculating them with it. You're driving the costs from the headcount and showing and putting that through the system. So you're modelling it. And Ron will show you some of that when we get to the demonstration side of things. So it's about focusing down onto the data collection when you do the rolling forecast, back to the key drivers in your business. Now, you already know that, and it's just about deciding those and agreeing those around your business and getting those communicated around the thing. And of course, that driver-based forecast, as you're starting to pick it up, drives other costs. I've just explained in the headcount side. We collect an FTE, and from that we can drive all the other costs, even taking it all the way through onto the cash flow. So step 1, looking at tackling the spreadsheet issue in your organisation, how you flow data around the business. Step 2, thinking about moving to a driver-based forecasting. Once you've got there, you can start to do things which are a lot more complex and a lot more interesting to your business. And that's using forecasts to answer the what-if question. So you're not just collecting one view of the information, but other scenarios. So you can collect a best case, a worst case, or what happens if we win this customer case, or what happens if this project is delayed, or what happens if we launch a new product on XYZ data. The ability to then collect more cuts of the data, different opinions of the data, will allow you to then compare those when you get it all together a group, and start to do that scenario comparisons as such. And that will help you increase your forecast accuracy. Yeah, that saves you time as well, because you can model that all through the system. So you're just collecting the basics of information, you're collecting different opinions, driving that through the model so you get consistent set calculations. And you get all this in minutes, not hours. This allows you to imagine quite a few different scenarios. Again, because you're using a proper database rather than a spreadsheet, that different cuts of data is easy to create. We can compare them to each other. And this really allows you to save time. You're not spending the time crunching different data. You're spending time looking at the scenarios and providing business value back to your senior management team, back to the people making decisions, because all of a sudden you're having a conversation now, not about how to crunch the data through your business, but different scenarios, and you can say, well, what about this risk? What about this risk of currency exchange? Or what about this risk of raw material prices? How can we tackle that in the organisation? And that's a far better conversation to be having around the business. Okay, so we've covered the first 3 steps. Step 1 about the spreadsheet, step 2 about driver-based forecasting, step 3 about what-ifs and scenarios. And then the next thing to think about is the process itself. It's about how you link this to targets and measures and rewards. And really this is about sometimes tackling the issue of people getting very tied to having a budget for their business. It's sometimes about we often see this sort of spend during the year where people don't spend too much, but then as they come into the end of Q4, they realise they need to spend more of their budget. We see a little spike in spending in the budget. It's about changing that culture a little bit in the organisation about having a budget and thinking more about that driver-based forecasting. We do need to get top management on board to support that rolling forecasting, moving away from a straight budgeting process, changing the data you're collecting, so it's less about the full P&L balance sheet cash flow, more about driver-based forecasting as such. So getting everybody on board with that process change and the way of operating is something which we need to do, and something which is very important. It is a people-based process where we're looking for opinions, and we need people engaged in that process and wanting to communicate with everybody else rather than just take away a little budget for their own section of the business. They've got to want to contribute their key drivers into the overall model and share that communication, share that data with other parts of the business. We do pick on this issue of avoiding linking forecasts to that targets and reward. It does drive specific types of behaviour, so that's just something to watch out for. And when you get the data, what we really want to do is, once you've built that model and that driver-based forecasting, is of course make it available to everybody. So what you often see with spreadsheets is it's the collection of data is the key driver. But what we really want to do is get that information shared around the business as quickly as possible. So if sales has an update on their key drivers, on what they're doing on pipeline, or a key customer they're about to win, we want that information communicated as quickly as possible to other parts of the organisation, whether that be production or the development side, or senior management, or whoever it might be. So being able to connect everybody into the business is important. And one way to do that is make sure we get that data out to everybody in easy to visualize ways. So the reporting and analytics side of things, the dashboarding side of things is an important factor. Not just when you're sharing information, so people can see the high level, drill down to data, analyze it different ways, but also going back to when we talked about that scenarios and what ifs, being able to compare one version with another. Okay, so moving on to the last step to think about, step 5, is then thinking about that time horizon as you're moving into a rolling forecast system. A lot of people always think in year chunks, so a 12-month period, and that's fine. If your business has a year time horizon, then pick 12 months as the right horizon. But you don't need to. If your business is more fast-paced, perhaps it's a more retail side business, maybe a horizon of 1 to 2 months might be more sensible. If you're bigger, more, say, a construction company or somebody building, say, engines or ships, then a time horizon of multiple years might be more sensible. So making sure that horizon and rolling forecast is aligned to your business cycles is sensible. But we do encourage people to break that yearly cycle. We understand that's important for finance, but it's not always so important for the business. So here's some good questions you can ask yourself to think about that time horizon. What's the speed of change? How does your capital requirements hit that? How long does it take to bring change on board in our business? Is it years or is it months? How long does it lead times for our product? How long does it take to change our supply contract or adjust our marketing programs, for effect on that, on our pipeline? And then that will give you a sense of what your forecasting time horizon, rolling forecast time horizon should be. Just a final hint and just a final shot at the spreadsheet again. Looking at a system that will easily allow you to model all these various scenarios, so different time periods is the key thing. It's difficult to do this in a spreadsheet. It's difficult to build that agility, that flexibility, that different ways of analysing things, the reporting side of things, all into a spreadsheet. And moving that traditional forecasting away from forecasting to the end of the year, moving to that rolling forecast time horizon, extending it out, can provide a lot of value to your organisation. Just remember, these are the 5 steps which I wanted to communicate really about rolling forecast. Remember, step 1, tackling the spreadsheet issue and that volume of data you need to crunch around the business. Step 2, thinking about driver-based forecast and modelling that through the business. Allows you to get to that rolling forecast which sounds out the multiple what-ifs and scenarios. Thinking about your forecasting process around the business, getting people on board with that change, so it's less about the annual budget, more around about fast collection of data. And then step 5, choose that forecasting horizon for your business. So we've looked at why companies might change to rolling forecasts. We looked at 5 steps or 5 areas which you can look at to tackle rolling forecasts in your business. Now I just want to have a quick look at a particular case study, and this is from ZAG. So they looked at implementing adaptive insights to do rolling forecast. They actually operate in the mobile accessories marketplace, so quite a fast-paced marketplace, very fast-paced. In fact, a lot of change in their products. They sell things like screen protectors, mobile keyboards, that's it, power management solutions and such. And their forecasting was very immature. They were going out to their sales staff. They did some sales forecasting, but that whole demand forecast was off and off. They just weren't predicting it right. And what they had to do to fix that, of course, was when all of a sudden there was a sale and they didn't know about, they had to do some urgent shipments overnight from China, which really hit their profit margins. As you can imagine, having to ship stuff overnight by a plane rather than putting it on a boat, really hit their profit margins. And it was really difficult as well to analyse how the customer discounts which the sales team were giving were impacting that whole wholesale pricing and overall profit margin. And this is almost shocking, really, when you look at that final bullet point down there. They missed some of the guided estimates of sales by 33%, so they were out. And this is quite a huge amount, really, and I really hope your forecasts aren't that bad, but 33% out. So, $100 million off in their estimates on their sales forecasts, and that really hurt them. So the implementation of a 12-month rolling forecast process where they were really going out on a regular basis every month, going to the sales team to get that sales forecast, really allowed them to step forward and grasp that issue, get better, more accurate information out to decision makers, just make better insights, make better decisions. So those static, inaccurate forecasts, which sent those expenses soaring on the freight costs, they saved $8 million by moving to that sales forecast and improving that forecast accuracy. The pricing issues which they had about discounts, they drove another $10 million in sales by just being better on the discount discipline and driving that through the business. That was a 5% increase in margin. Centralized data repositories so they could all look at the data together, to save them 24 days of manual report building. So just crunching of data through spreadsheets saved 24 days on that. Yeah? And those dashboards which they shared out to all the decision makers, that's how they improved that decision making rather than people going by gut. People could make decisions on timely and accurate information. Okay, so that's a particular case study. Really big impact there at ZAG of implementing roll forecasts. I will very quickly, because I want to give Ron enough time to show you the product, just talk a little bit about adaptive insights. We've been at this, as I said, 15 years now. We've got 3,800 tapping on 4,000 customers worldwide using our platform, which is purely cloud, to do financial planning and analytics. We turn over $100 million in revenue. We just recently got acquired by Workday. We've got offices around the world, and we've got a good presence in the Nordics country as well, working with some great partners like Adedo to deliver the solution to customers. Customers from all sorts of industries. This is quite a UK-centric slide, sorry, because I come from the UK, but all sorts of industries here. The key thing to take away is the fact that we actually deliver to the finance department. There's no one industry that uses this. There are some good names here on the Nordic side of things, from Telia on the right-hand side and Price Runner and Tieto, through to people like Snellman and other people like that, or Fastens from the Nordics area. So we've got a good presence around the world and in the Nordics area. So, Ron, I wanted to give you enough time to just show some of those points in the illustration. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Rob. I'll just share my screen. Okay, right. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ron Owen. I'm going to go through adaptive, but I'm not going to give you a demo per se. Typically, my demos take 2 hours, and I've got about 20-25 minutes to actually walk through some scenarios. But to give you an overview, adaptive is actually a cloud application, as Rob said. What we could actually do is to just have access to the internet, which pretty much everybody has these days, and a web browser, and I can access adaptive. By selecting the icon on the top left-hand corner, I can access all areas of adaptive, whether I'm looking at the ability to look at data sheets, business drivers, or the various reports, or indeed the dashboards. I can access everything. But as I said, I'm not here to actually give you a demonstration of the product itself. Behind the scenes, what does it look like? It actually looks very much Excel-like, and that was deliberate by design, because when you're actually trying to relieve finance folk of a tool that they've been using for many years, it's always a good idea to give them something that has a bit of a look and a feel of Excel itself. So as you can see from the screen, we're looking at information in a grid-like format. We're looking at a chart of accounts. In this case, it's your profit and loss chart of accounts. And we're looking at this for a particular business area. So we're looking at this down here at the bottom level of my sales operations area for my Sales London region. But we're also looking at this for a particular version of the product. And this is where I want to hit on Rob's first point. Rob was talking about having a dedicated application, but he's talking about having a dedicated application for rolling forecasts. As you can see in the versions here, I've got many versions of my forecast and my budget and my plan. So as you can see here, I can have things like a what-if scenario if I want a discrete understanding of what would happen if we were to either divest or acquire a particular part of our business. I could actually run a scenario for that. I can have different scenarios for foreign exchange analysis if I actually want to look at my actuals at a budget rate, so my actuals at last year's rate or at a constant currency. I can do that too. But you'll notice in here that I'm looking at information for my working budget. So this information in here is running for a working budget, which is just a standard budget, which is going from January right the way through to December and beyond. It can go multi-year. There's no limit on the number of years you can have for your budget and plan. A lot of our customers are using Adaptive for 3, 5, 10, even 50-year plans in certain industries. But this is all about rolling forecasts. So why is this actually important? Well, in here, when we're talking about a particular forecast, what are we doing? We're actually saying I want to combine information from my actuals with information from my budget to create a new forecast. Here you can see that my first 3 months of the year, all the numbers are in green. Wherever you see a green number in Adaptive, that means that information is an actual value. So what we're doing here is actually combining the data for my first 3 months of actuals to my last 9 months of my previous budget to create a new forecast total in here. And as you can see down the bottom, that's the same value as I'm adding up the values in there. And I can hear you thinking, well, I can do that in a spreadsheet. But there's certain things that this lends itself to that means that you can't necessarily do this sort of thing in a spreadsheet. In this example here, we're looking at our P&L, but if we were to start to look at something like cash flow, we then might see something that is slightly different. So in this particular model, I'm showing information for my cash flow. Now, cash flow typically will always have a beginning and an ending balance. And as you can see here, that my ending balance is the beginning balance of the next period. So I've got my period, I've got my movements in the middle here, and I've got my ending balance, which becomes my beginning balance for the next period, which is fine. You can actually set up a model to do that. Where it becomes really interesting is when you go backwards and you start to think, when I'm looking at my actuals in this particular forecast version, there's my beginning balance, there's my ending balance, there's my beginning balance for April, which was my ending balance for March. Now you can see that we're combining dimensionality together to actually create this flow of information for the cash flow itself, which is really, really simple to do in Adaptive because it's literally referencing the previous period. The formulas are in the model, they're not in the sheet itself. So any of the formulas are written once and you don't have to worry too much about anything else in there. But it becomes incredibly powerful when you start to think along the lines of budgeting, plans and forecasts when you're looking at things like opening and closing balances. So if you're doing some sort of inventory, you're going to have that sort of thing in there as well. One other thing to note in here, if I change it back to my working budget at this particular point in time, it's the same data. It's the same, it's not the same numbers, but it is exactly the same structure. It's exactly the same template. It's the same account. I don't have to go out and actually build 50 templates. I can just build one template. I can have that template for all of my organization structure. For any particular business area within here, I can go and look at that information. It'll immediately bring the data back. So I don't effectively push templates out. what I do is actually allow users to come in and access this data themselves. So that's sort of covering off the whole thing about being a dedicated application. Yes, you can do it in Excel, but it's really difficult. If I want to spin up a new version, it takes me 3 or 4 mouse clicks. If I want to do that in Excel, it's well, you sit down for days to actually make sure that it's all right. Rob's second point was about driver-based planning. And to illustrate that, what we're going to do is we're actually going to look at some revenue plans of information. In adaptive, you can have multiple different styles of data entry. In this particular example here, we're looking at multi-dimensional data entry. We're looking at it for a particular business area. So I can actually change the business area and look at that information there. You'll notice also on the screen that all of the numbers are grey, except for 1 or 2. So if I'm looking at this information for my product A1, it will tell me that the white cells are the ones that I can change. The grey cells are the ones that I can't. These are my drivers. There are calculations down the bottom, but the main driver in this particular example is price. If I wanted to go in here and make a whole bunch of changes, it would be really quite tiresome to do. If I'm thinking about driver-based planning, all I really need to do is to access the sales drivers sheet itself. Let's just bring that back up onto the screen here. And now we can actually see that I've got my sales drivers for product A1, and I've got this information for my total company, but I've also got this information down at my London sales region level as well. So if I now bring that information into play, a couple of things you'll notice will change. First and foremost, the first 3 values are, that we had earlier are now greyed out. These have become global drivers, so they can only be changed at a global level. So if you've got a particular business driver that goes across your business, that's where you would actually change that. If you've got a business driver that can be changed at a local level, this is where you would change this as well. So if I wanted to increase, for example, my price of the product for product group A from £96 to £120, I could do that. I could then just copy that forward to the end and save that information back. I've made one very simple basic change. If I now go back to my revenue sheet and I just refresh that, we'll be able to see a whole series of changes that actually happen on the revenue sheet as well. There's the 120 that I've changed. There's my new gross revenue calculated discount. It's actually taking the units times the price, and it's actually giving me now, minus my discount, my net revenue. All of that information will then flow up back into my P&L, so that I've now got it not just for one product, but I've got it across the whole products for Sales London. Indeed, within Adaptive, if I look at this information at a total company level, the application instantly consolidates the data. One of the things about a spreadsheet system is that there is no instant consolidation. You can link all the spreadsheets together, but you've got to make jolly sure that all of those links are working and that nobody has deleted any of those links. But in Adaptive, it's all in one place and it's all driving information instantly. Rob's third point was to talk about multiple scenarios. Now in Adaptive, as we've seen already, you can have many scenarios. So we can actually start to think about how I'm actually going to manipulate data, one scenario against another, and possibly view that information through a report. But what you can also do in Adaptive is to actually have specific views of information to do scenario analysis. On the screen now, and I've just flipped this view of information over for the moment. On the screen now, what we're actually looking at is a very high level view of my total company and a series of the accounts in here. As you can see here, I'm just looking at 4 or 5 accounts for my P&L and for my operating expenses to give me a total net income value for January 2019. This is my current version. This ties back to the information that we could see in that P&L a few moments ago. What we've also got now is the ability to actually start to manipulate the data and start to think about how we can actually update data based upon known criteria. In our best case scenario, we know that if I've got revenues being increased by 25% in January, then that's actually going to increase the bottom line almost by £1 million. We've also got a best and worst case, but over here on the right hand side, this just proves that we can have as many scenarios as we like. For 2 years now, I've been demonstrating what are the probabilities of facing the UK and indeed facing Europe if we've got a hard or a soft Brexit or no Brexit at all. And it's only when you start to look across the bottom here that you start to see the impact of any one of those. So if I simply go in here and say, I'm going to change that to 1%, I can save that information and that will instantly update the data. And now I've now got a very different looking net income value compared to what I had in my current version and compared to what I had a few months ago when I had that up at something like 20%. So the ability to actually plan by multiple scenarios is very powerful and adaptive. We have customers who are using this for all sorts of different businesses. We've got energy companies, for example, who are actually planning about fuel and about how much kilowatts per hour they're actually producing. We've got other organisations that are planning financial metrics within here. It's completely limitless when it comes to that. And of course, it will always tie back into the rolling forecast as well. So that's covered a little bit about being a dedicated application and running some drivers as opposed to actually changing every number in your forecast, but also having the ability to do multiple scenarios. Rob's fourth point was about collaboration. And again, what Rob was really alluding to in this was the fact that when you're actually running a budget and a plan, people are actually doing this sometimes for their own personal gain. So you can imagine within a sales organisation, the salesman wants to know which is the best product I can actually make the most money out of. That's all very well, but how do you actually control that process? In Adaptive, you can see here that I've got something called the process overview. And in here is where we can actually collaborate with each other with regards to the budgeting process. So that when we're actually going through the process, we can actually see which processes need to actually happen and at what they need to happen and at what time scales. So in here, for example, you can see that some of these processes have happened. You can see that the setting targets has actually happened, but you can also see there are other things you can do in here, like adding attachments, like using this to annotate to each other as regards to how we're actually using the technology itself. Whenever something actually gets updated, we can move it from one side to the other so that we then know how much percentage of the overall progress we've done and how far we actually have to go and which things have actually got to be run within this process. Again, Rob was also talking about it's not just collaboration of the process, but it's actually looking at this information at a top level. And this is where we're still in the application, remember. This is where we can actually start to look at dashboard views of information. Adaptive has got a dashboard view called Discovery, and it allows the users to actually have their own view of the world. So you may have an executive dashboard, you may have a dashboard for the finance department, for the HR department, but these are dashboards that are available to everybody and they can only see the data that is available to them. They cannot go across and see other people's data. But it does give you the ability to look at this information at different levels of detail. So if I wanted to look at this information, for example, down at a lower level of detail, and indeed if I actually wanted to look at this for the UK, just type in United in there and search. That should give me the detail for the United Kingdom. I can then go and drill into that information and look at that information instantly, and it instantly updates all of the views of data that I've got in there. I can then actually go and drill into a specific number. And if I wanted to look at this by product, I could look at this by product. And if I wanted to look at this by customer, I can look at this by customer. And it is a completely code-free environment. There's no programming involved at all within the Adaptive suite of products. Remember, we're looking at this information for our working budget. If I was to go in here and change this to my forecast, it will completely redraw all of the dashboard views that we're actually looking at, but it will now look at this information against my forecast. And you'll see here now that although the number is correct, the variances have changed because my forecast, as we saw earlier, starts in April. I'm looking at data for March. If I go in here and then start to look at information for the next period, it will automatically update those values, and there you can see the variances coming back into play. So what have we seen so far? So we've seen our dedicated application. We absolutely believe that this is the right thing for people to actually have a dedicated application. We've also seen the fact that we believe in driver-based planning for when you're doing rolling forecasts. Rolling forecasts can actually happen far more frequently than you think. We think about rolling forecasts on a monthly basis, but quite often you may actually be driving to do that even more frequently than monthly. We've also looked at this ability to have multiple scenarios, so you can actually see what's going to happen if certain things happen in the marketplace, if exchange rates change, for example, how's that actually going to affect my business, and what is my best and worst case scenario on that. Being able to collaborate all of this information together, being able to share not only the actual process, but also the outcomes and the outputs of that, again, is something that we've just looked at. The final thing about rolling forecasts is this whole element of the time horizon. Where do you start and where do you actually end on a particular rolling forecast? If we go back for a moment and go back and look at our P&L view, we saw in that sheet there that we actually had a finite time. Although it went up to 2019, and in fact I just collapsed the view for 2020, it still ends at 2020. Within rolling forecasts, you want to be able to move that timeline to according to and what suits your business. You don't want to be restricted by the end of year. And the reason for that is because business doesn't stop at the end of year. It carries on into the next year, and you may want to predict what you feel is actually going to happen in the next year. To show an example of that, let me show you a report we've got in Adaptive. Now, the reports in Adaptive are completely interactive, exactly the same way as you've seen for the dashboards. But what it also allows you to do is it allows you to actually view information, view data, whether I'm actually looking at my actuals, my budgets, my plans. I can look at anything within it that's actually held in the model itself. In this particular example, we're actually looking at a rolling 12-month report. At the top here, you can see that I've got my periods from January through to December and giving me a calculated total for that rolling 12 months. It's also, someone very cleverly has actually given me an average value across those 12 months. But you'll notice that this figure here for 2019 and this figure here for the rolling 12 months are the same, which is logical because I'm actually looking at the calendar year for 2019. So what happens when I change this back to March? It then actually rewrites the report. I'm not doing anything other than rerunning the report. And it now starts it in March, but it now moves it forward to February of the following year. I've still got 12 months worth of data, but I've now got a new total of data within here. And you'll notice obviously that that total now is slightly different to what I had for my calendar year. So this is my new forecast total effectively based upon what I had for my calendar year. As I said, all of this information, I can drill down on all of this information. If I wanted to look at detail on any value in here, I can actually do so. So in essence, what I've covered this morning is the ability to think about rolling forecast, but think about it from Rob's 5 points. Make sure it's a dedicated application. Excel, at the end of the day, really won't cut it for you for a number of reasons that we've explained. There's also the time factor. Actually building Excel models and then maintaining Excel models is really hard. When I talk to customers, when they're talking about their budgeting process, there are two bottlenecks. The bottleneck is actually building the templates in the first instance, and then the bottleneck at the other end is collecting them and stitching them all together. The bit in the middle is just people filling in numbers. Our customers get lots and lots of value out of Adaptive when they've been using it in year 2 and year 3 and year 4 and so on and so forth, simply because that first part of the process where they have to go out and build templates disappears. They don't have to worry about that because the templates have already been built. They're just going to reuse the ones that they had last year. And it's very simple, very straightforward, and then they just roll with it, and they're just happy with that. Running it as a driver-based application is the way forward. I've been talking about driver-based planning for more years than I care to remember, and it really has taken traction now with applications such as Adaptive. Being able to run those multiple scenarios where you can actually look at different views of information on the same screen and being able to manipulate the numbers and see what the impact is of those manipulations. Having it as a collaborative process, being able to actually work as a business, not just work as individuals, and then being able to share the results across the whole of the organisation. And finally, our forecast horizon. How far out do you actually want to run your rolling forecasts? Well, in Adaptive, it's as far out as it needs to be. I'm going to pause at this point in time, and I do believe there were some questions, so I'm going to stop my share at the moment. I may need to return to it. Rob, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ron. And yeah, first off, again, thank you everybody for joining this. I know we're slightly over time, but we'll just quickly pick up questions from Stefan, actually. So yeah, no, Stefan, thanks for the question. I know, just pick on the data one first, actually, Stefan. It's a good question, one we get a lot, which is, you know, data systems like this are very much about connecting to other sources of data in your business. It's not just ERPs and general ledgers nowadays. That key drivers we just talked about, whether it be sales information from a CRM, or it might be a your web tracking system, or supply chain, or all sorts of other systems out there nowadays. People want to connect to them. And yeah, our product has got open APIs. It's got a data integration piece, in connecting that data in is a key task which we can do. So yes, you can definitely automate a lot of this feeds, definitely around the actual information as well. Are there any other questions anybody's got? I'm just conscious that we're a little bit over time, which we promised, but we really appreciate you joining this call. Any other question? I mean, if you need to unmute yourself, you can. I think there's a little button down the bottom left of your screen where you should be able to click mute if anybody wants to ask a question, or just type it in. Says he pausing for effect. Johannes, did you want to say anything as we wrap this up?
Well, thank you very much, Rob and Ron. Great presentation. I'll continue in Swedish here. Tack alla för att ni tog er tid att på här på lunchen att lyssna på rullande prognoser och fördelar med att gå över till det, och även titta då lite grann på hur Adaptive Insight kan lösa det här. Vi kommer att ta kontakt med och skicka den här presentationen till er om ni är intresserade, så att vi återkommer med det. Och om ni har några fler frågor så får ni gärna mejla till mig. Jag har mejladress johannes.westergarden@adedo.com. Än en gång, tack så mycket. Så stänger vi ner här. Tack.
Yeah, and then my Swedish does stretch that text from me as well. So have a great day, everybody. Thank you very much.
Okay.